Absalom, Absalom by William Faulkner. So William Faulkner is, of course, a major name in American letters and pretty much the preeminent figure of Southern U.S. literature. And he is an author towards which I have something of a neutral attitude. This is the third book now of his that I have read, the other two being The Sound and the Fury and Light in August. And while I can recognize aspects of genius in his works, I think his was a genius which was unfortunately diluted by a certain, how shall I say, sloppiness. But I'll talk about that. So, Absalom, Absalom is one of Faulkner's most prominent works. In fact, I believe it was instrumental in helping him win the Nobel Prize. And judging by what I've read, the verdict as to which book is, for all intents and purposes, his true masterpiece is often kind of a toss-up between The Sound and the Fury and Absalom, Absalom. And having read both of those books now, I will say, just to throw my 2 cents in the mix, I think I would say that this one is probably my favorite of the books of his that I've read so far, although there are still some caveats there. But we're going to talk about that. So, what is the story of Absalom, Absalom? What tale does this book tell? Well, this book, and I don't know that it's strictly necessary, but if you want to read this, you may want to read The Sound and the Fury first because a lot of the characters in that book reappear in this one, and he doesn't really mince words setting them up again. It's just kind of taken that you will have read the other book, I think. So you might want to think about reading The Sound and the Fury before tackling this one because you may not be aware of the context and significance of certain characters in this book. But the story of Absalom, Absalom is relayed secondhand to Quentin Compson. And again, Quentin Compson that was a major character in Sound and the Fury. But the story which Absalom, Absalom tells is the story of Thomas Sutpen, a mysterious man who shows up in William Faulkner's Yoknapatawpha, if I'm pronouncing that right, the fictitious county in Mississippi that Faulkner populated with his stories. And Thomas Sutpen shows up sometime in like the 1830s, mid 1800s, and he's going to make a name for himself. And he sets out to create a dynasty. He builds a big ass mansion, a plantation house, and then sows the soil with seed and has lots of slaves work the ground for him. And but what he really needs after accomplishing all this is an heir. And so the majority of this book is the recounting of Thomas Sutpen's life story through various different narrators to Quentin Compson and through him to us. Now, it's about as much as I'm going to attempt to summarize the plot of this book because it's pretty convoluted and there's a lot of territory that it covers. There's a lot of characters in here, and I'm not going to, chase down every last detail to expound upon. That's just the broad overview, is that there's a guy named Thomas Sutpen who shows up, going to make a name for himself in the South, and he founds a booming plantation and sets out to create a dynasty. But sadly, it all comes, or maybe not so sadly, it all comes crumbling down, and this tale is related to Quentin Compson and through him to us. So that's the plot insofar as I care to give it. Let's talk about the characters that populate this plot. So this is a strange book because the story that it tells is relayed secondhand. So the characters are removed. And that's kind of the point. As the story of Thomas Sutpen evolves, as the different narrators who relate it progress throughout the book, you come to get more and more information, and you come to see things about the story as it develops. And so it's not a book in which I can say the characters are like really, really well developed and fleshed out and human. They do feel human, but again, there's a remove to the action. So rather, the point of this book is that you're not supposed to empathize maybe so much with these characters as you are supposed to kind of cast your own judgments on the story and decide for yourself who these people really were, what their hearts were truly like, and where you stand on the story. It's much more of a subjective experience than other books. So I can't really say too much about the characters because again they're such a remove from the action of the story. But that's kind of the point because it's retroactive speculation. So much of it. So the characters, take that how you will. Now let's talk about the themes of this book because one of the issues that I have with Faulkner is that his books, it's kind of like if you've read one, you've read all, or at least it seems that way to me. He was very preoccupied with a certain handful of themes, and he really recycled them a lot. There's a lot of shades of Light in August in this, including a character who it is revealed possesses a certain degree of black blood, even though they pass as white. And again, that's basically the entire plot of Light in August. But also, this is an examination of the Old South and the eventual collapse of the Old South after the Civil War, and also some speculating on the causes for the South's loss of the Civil War, which the characters in this book view as something of a judgment from God because the South was commanded by people like Thomas Sutpen, who, as the book demonstrates, were not particularly of a sterling character, I should say. But Faulkner's themes that he's so preoccupied with are the collapse and decay of the Old South and the legacy of slavery and the Civil War and its after effects. And this is just like Faulkner's bread and butter. It's all in here. But I think that it's done the best, at least of the books of Faulkner's that I've read thus far. I think it's done the best in this one. I think the way that he kind of tells this story of an individual, Thomas Sutpen, and then also makes it be kind of something of an allegory for the fate of the Confederacy in the Old South. I think it's tied together pretty well in this one, and makes it all comes together a little bit better, I think, than in The Sound and the Fury or Light in August, and of course the strained race relations in the South, which were, sadly, such a terrible thing after the Civil War. I think he just pulls things together more cohesively and better in this. So I think this one is probably my favorite of the three books of his that I've read so far. But now let's talk about the writing, because that is the main thing we need to talk about when we talk about Faulkner. It is both the blessing and the curse of William Faulkner. It is the thing that I can praise the most and also that I have to condemn the most. So, William Faulkner wrote in a pretty unique style. He was a modernist author. I believe you could lump him in with the modernists like James Joyce and Virginia Woolf. He used lots of stream of consciousness, but beyond that, he used the English language in a very unique way. He really is kind of the progenitor of that neo-biblical style of writing, which Cormac McCarthy and William Gay really emulated, although I think they did it far better, actually, and I'm going to try to explain why. But the thing about Faulkner, I think, is that he's important not so much because of what he did, but because of what the people who emulated him did later. Because again, I think Cormac McCarthy and William Gay did Faulkner so much better than Faulkner did Faulkner. But William Faulkner wrote in a very, very highly wrought style of writing, and at times it is beautiful. At times it's beautiful as long as you don't actually think about what the words he's using actually mean. And at times it's just flat out gibberish. It really is. William Faulkner, I think, um, was concerned more about the sound that the words he was writing made rather than what they actually meant, because damn does he use some very strange sentences in this book, some very strange diction. And I did a review on Light in August last year, and I went through in a PowerPoint format in that review to highlight some of the goofy ass writing that Faulkner employs in that book. Yes, Faulkner may be a towering figure in American literature, but a lot of his writing was just flat out goofy. And if I have always prided myself on being that guy who will say what nobody else has the balls to say. And so I'm going to say this right now, if nobody else will. A lot of William Faulkner's writing is just flat out purple prose. It is. It is purple prose to the nth degree. There comes a time when you're reading the sentences in this book where you don't have a damn clue what he's actually saying. It's just ridiculous, overwrought language, words strung together because they sound halfway cool, but they don't really mean much. And that's my problem with Faulkner. He had an incredible vocabulary. And when he did it well, when he really focused on what he wanted to say, I think he was capable of true genius, but I think that genius was diluted by a certain lack of discipline, because there are lines in this book that are some of the most retarded lines I think I've ever read. Like in Light in August, there is a line. He unironically wrote the line, small little houses, in Light in August. You don't believe me? Watch my review of that one, because believe me, I pulled it out. And that's a question I believe I could ask. Can you really be considered a great writer if you unironically write the line small little houses? Can you? I don't know, but he did it. And in this one, he does similar shenanigans to that. A character's eyes are described as being both bright and dark at the same time. Bright and dark are antonyms. I don't know how your eyes can be bright and dark at the same time. And he relies on paradox, on linguistic paradox a lot in his writing, I think. Um, and of course, he has his handful of words that he uses ad nauseum in this book, like grim. I cannot tell you how many times he describes something as grim in Absalom. Absalom. The house was airless and grim. His eyes were steely and grim. Everything's grim. And then, of course, he has the word attenuation. Oh my good lord, he loved that word attenuation. He uses that practically every other sentence in this book. And then, of course, the words like implacable, effluvium. Oh, he loves that word, effluvium. And so he just uses these words over and over, and he makes these sentences so ridiculously overwrought that you lose sight of whatever he's actually trying to say. In fact, I don't even think half the sentences in this book really said much. If he had actually just focused and concentrated on just saying what he wanted to say, this book wouldn't be nearly as long as it was, and it's not even that long of a book. But like, the best way I can describe reading Absalom is like walking around outside in a fog. The shapes of things like trees and buildings loom up darkly out of the mist, but their detail is indecipherable, because the language that he's describing this story with is just so over the top. It's just flat out retarded at certain points. I'm serious. I mean, it's just absurd what he does in this book at times. However, as I said, I can both condemn and praise the writing, and there are times in this book of true beauty. There are certain passages in this that are truly magnificent when he's actually focused on trying to concisely say something, and he puts that vocabulary and all that diction, to a very specific purpose. That's when Faulkner really succeeds. But so much of this book is just purple prose. It is. And let nobody tell you different. William Faulkner wrote a lot of purple prose. It is writing that does not accentuate the story, that is not just beautiful, but it is so overwrought and ridiculous that it takes away from the story, because it shifts the focus from what it's describing to the way it's describing it. So much so that you're not even sure half the time what exactly is being described. But, you know, that's just me. That's how I feel with Faulkner. I think his books are really more exercises in style, really, than substance. But I can acknowledge that he did pioneer, a certain style of writing, and there is a real craftsmanship of a sort to Faulkner. So I don't want to sound like I'm shitting on Faulkner. Again, my attitude towards his work is just neutral. It is. I don't particularly like it, but I don't particularly dislike it. But I will say, on behalf of Absalom, that I think this is probably my favorite of his books that I've read thus far. And I have As I Lay Dying up here on the shelf to read, and I also have Go Down Moses. So that's at least two more Faulkner books that I will be reading. But as it stands, this is the third, and of the ones that I've read thus far, this is the one that I would recommend most. So right now, as of now, um, if someone was to ask me if I'm only going to read one Faulkner book, which should it be? I think I would recommend this. The Sound and the Fury is very remarkable in terms of its shifting perspectives and what he really did with first person narration. Light in August didn't really impress me all that much. I thought the story was kind of over the top and gratuitous and kind of stupid. But this book, I think, is the best of his that I've read so far. The themes actually interweave pretty well with the story. It has a nice kind of subjective effect, like I said, where you're supposed to kind of reach your own conclusions about the events depicted. And the writing frequently ridiculous and overwrought, but at times stunning and magnificent. So I put my money on Absalom. But um, have you read Absalom by William Faulkner? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said about it today. As for my ultimate rating of this book, I'm going to give Absalom just a good solid B. I think that's the highest I would give any Faulkner book that I've read so far. So I'm going to give Absalom a B. If you haven't read Absalom, this is the one I think I could recommend more than any other book of his to read. So if you want to give Faulkner a try, just go with this one, I would say. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.